When I was growing up, I grew up in Abeokuta, by the way. Life was pretty much simple. You went to school, you came back in the night. There was no power. There was no NEPA, pretty much. And there were no generators, so you just slept, played football with friends after school. I was really terrible at playing football, so they didn't typically put me in many of the sets. Many of the male kids would relate to what I'm talking about. So I personally found like solace in the library. So I found the state library very early. I think I was maybe like 11, 12 years old the first time I made it to the state library at Abeokuta. And I was supposed to be reading for like exams at school, but I wasn't much of a serious student in the early part of my life. I eventually became serious at some point. So the first book I found actually was the story of the Wright brothers. It's the story of building the aircrafts. And the next one I found was the story of Alexander Graham, was the story of the telephone. The aircraft story was quite fascinating to me as a child because one, it was a story of people just doing like a lot of stupid stuff. People were wearing like wings and they were trying to jump off cliffs. I can't imagine the amount of accidents that would have happened. And it begs the question, if life isn't just about like trying little, small and stupid ideas. So I embarked on this journey of I was going to build my own little things. As you can imagine, the first thing I tried to build, not so little, was an aircraft. At this point, I was probably in JSS2. No physics experience, nothing. So internet was not as common. So the only way you used the internet was you beg your parents for maybe 150 naira. You go and do overnight browsing, right? And then, all night you download material. So I downloaded about 300 pages of engineering design of aircrafts and printed them. And I was going to make my own airplane. Obviously, that didn't work out. So the next thing was, I was like, okay, maybe a plane is too big. I need something really small. At this point, I was trying to build my own microscope, which again was very difficult to do because I couldn't bring together all of the materials. Fast forward 18 years, give or take, I have built businesses that have made tens of billions of dollars a year. And there are like 3 lessons that have stuck with me, which I just want to share with the audience. For me, the first one is like what I call embracing the shadows. I think if you are not like, somebody that is really out there, you are not like someone that is really like famous and popular, right? The shadows could also be a place of strength sometimes because one, it's very easy to try fail in the shadows. Nobody really cares. Nobody really sees you. Back to the Wright brothers story that I was talking about. The first flight they made was 15 seconds and there were only 5 people that were there. There was no grand like claps or awards for actually doing that thing that they did, which meant that they failed as well. Like not many people saw it. And I think that, sometimes a lot of things in life, even life itself, actually starts within the shadows. It's tough to see life. If someone was pregnant, for example, in the first few weeks, you wouldn't see it except they told you, right? So I have come to believe that, it's not everybody in the world that is extrovertish, and it's not everybody in the world that has that energy to project what they want to do. And it's fine to be comfortable in the fact that you want to stay in shadows to do things because the shadows sometimes could also be a place of strength and also not just a disadvantage. The second thing that has stuck with me is knowledge. Obviously, there's a principle called the principle of by a particular professor. I think his name is David Deutsch. It's the whole idea of this principle is that anything is possible, anything that is not, hindered by the laws of physics, you can achieve it. Actually, the only reason why you don't know how to do it is because you don't have the knowledge to do it. And if you try and try and try, that and fail enough, you can probably do it. And so my story of the airplane itself, right? One of the very first principle that you would have learned in like science or physics will be gravity. Everybody knows, right? So by rational knowledge, you throw anything up, it's going to fall. That is the mode, as Prof said earlier, right? Now, but in the same physics, right, there's aircrafts, right? And there's another force at play, which is called lift. And the whole idea is that at some point, if you, as human race, I would say researched enough, they found something else called lift, which means that while it was true that if we threw anything up, it was going to fall, at some point we could take a lift. And in my, I guess, final physics years in college, one of the things I found very interesting was another force at play called escape velocity, which is pretty much that at a particular speed, beyond the fact that you could take a lift, you could actually even get out of the universe, which would be beyond crazy if you thought about it like, you know, in the primitive years of human beings. So what I do is that I spend a lot of time finding knowledge. A lot of my experiences in technology, building software engineering and all of that. And I remember the story of getting my first computer. It was a very interesting story. My brother was doing sort of like multi-level marketing where you invite 10 people, they give you a keyboard, and then you invite 10 people, they give you a mouse. And that's sort of how I started learning how to code. I had this keyboard. There was literally there was even no power, all right? So it was just a keyboard for years. And unfortunately for me, the computer never came together actually. So it was like 3 months you get the mouse, 3 months you get like the UPS, but it never actually came together. But the very first time I was in front of the actual computer in a computer lab, I knew how to type already. I was the fastest in the class because years had gone by where I just practiced this thing without anything in the shadows, literally. So I remember this was like probably sometime in primary school. We're doing like some programming, right? And everybody was trying to learn how to code, and the kids would be sort of like typing one after the other, and the teachers were frustrated by that. So they needed people that could type fast, and I could really just type fast because I had learned over the years how to do this. And I'll wrap up my story by talking about the last thing that has always stood out for me, which I call embracing pain. And the reason why I say it that way is that I remember the story, a particular article that was published in Daily Times about 50 years ago by Taisho. It talks about that may your road be rough. And it was like, I'm not cursing you. He started this story by talking about a farmer that was about 55 years of age. This farmer was living close to his house, and he had food, he had everything he needed to be self-sufficient. But the farmer was also not happy because he felt like he wasn't as young, as youthful as he was, and he didn't have the energy to farm as much as possible. But he was comfortable and he was accomplished. And Taisho went on to say that if we looked at the farmer, we would be jealous because this guy is happy, like, he has no problem. But at the reward for like ambition is like pain. And then he started to talk about the Americans and the Russians. And he talked about how those guys were shooting people to the moon. And that if you were an astronaut, that they were going to shoot you to the moon, you had other concerns, right? They were promising you that this is a one-way journey. You might never come back. But at the end of the day, our successes are a virtue of the risk that we're willing to take. And that's like the Americans and the Russians, part of the reasons why, you know, in the World War, they had sort of dominated was the fact that they were willing to take a lot more risk than those of us that were just comfortable in our, you know, zone. We had food, we had shelter, but we weren't willing to push the boundaries of what's possible. I'll wrap up the story by talking about a quote I really like, which says that everything you look at, just think about the hospital, the microphone, the phones, the houses, everything around us is built by people that are not necessarily smarter than us. They just cared enough to build it. And I would just say that My way of getting out of the shadow is that you have to find something that you can build, and then you can ride on the back of that stuff out of the shadows. And then, who knows, right? The world is yours for the taking. Thank you so much.